Okay, good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, October 17th, and if you've lost track again of space and time, you are at the UNC Water and Health Conference, and welcome everybody, both here in person and online. It's very exciting to have everybody here. As we do every morning, Bart, you can go to the next slide. I do want to thank all of our sponsors who make this meeting possible and make the attendance of a lot of our colleagues from low and middle income countries support the travel scholarships and travel fellows. Very excited, the Osprey Foundation, the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, RTI International, Chemonics World Vision, Business Connect, and P&G as our top sponsors. Again, next year you can see yourselves up here in lights, so please do consider giving to the Water and Health Conference. We couldn't do this conference without their support. You can go to the next one, Bart, thank you. So it was brought to my attention yesterday, and rightfully so, that many of you that are here with us this week, both online and in person, are representing organizations and many thousands of WASH heroes who work in communities where they too are putting their lives at loss and at risk to carry out their roles. We talked about sanitation workers yesterday, but I do think that many of you, of course, have worked with and lost staff who've been killed or died accidentally while carrying out their work. And so it is important for all of us to recognize the courage, compassion, and dedication, and of course the ultimate sacrifice of all those who are involved in the work that we do. And so I just want to make sure that we've acknowledged that it goes beyond sanitation workers, and thank you, Rachel, for bringing this back up to me. I also want to go back to how we started the week and remind everyone of our purpose, which is to interrogate the science and evidence to better inform policy and practice, and to do so with cultural humility and sensitivity to the lived experiences of others, and that these discussions are happening in lots of different places. Bart, you can go to the next slide. A few of the students who are actually attending our conference came up to me with a podcast, and I listened to it last night. And if you want to continue some of these discussions around decolonization and systemic inequalities, you may want to tune in. I thought it was an interesting listen, so I just want to let all of you know about what I was listening to. Finally, on the next slide, if your organization has not yet done so, please consider joining the Lead Pledge and commit to stop using the use of lead-leaching parts and components in the construction of water supply systems. You can learn more outside. There's a booth at a table set up, but please, this is something that we can all do and stop today, so we might as well take steps to do that. Okay, now for what many of you have been waiting for, which is the announcement of our Technology Innovation Awards. Again, I want to thank Business Connect, RTI, the Water Institute for making this possible, our judges, William Kamkwamba, and those who demonstrated their technologies. It was great fun. For those of you who sat here, had lunch, we were able to watch. It was great fun. I'd like to now turn it over to Jamie Harris to introduce our award winners.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to see who won the awards and the plenary, of course. My name is Jamie Harris. I'm with Business Connect, and we were excited to host the Technology Showcase this year with RTI and UNC. In previous years, it was just a friendly presentation, but this year we did decide to make it a competition just to highlight those innovations and give that critical feedback to the innovators and technologies so they can continue to improve. So with all of the awards that I'm announcing today, they are also receiving consultation from RTI and Business Connect to improve and bring their technologies to market. So without further ado, I can go to the first one, the Audience Choice Award. Got a sneak peek. So the Audience Choice Award was determined by the audience. We had a poll going where the audience was asked to consider impact, innovation, feasibility, and sustainability when they rated each presentation on a scale of 1 to 10. So the winner of that, let's have the backpack made with single-use plastic and African fabrics in Liberia with Environmental Rescue Initiative. The audience and all of us were so impressed with all of your beautiful products. And I was told that they are for sale at this conference if you would like one. So we have Jeremy and Edgard sharing the awards. So please stay on stage. Thank you. Yep, we can stay on stage. Okay, for the next one, we have the Impact Award. So this was an innovation that addresses a significant challenge in WASH. We wanted to make sure it was relevant today to communities that need WASH. And it was designed to be scalable and environmentally sustainable in the long term. That was our goal with this Impact Award. And the winner for the Impact Award this year was the Turry Tab with the University of California at Berkeley. Congratulations. This one, if you weren't there, they had some nonverbal visuals going that were really cool to watch. So that was awesome. Awesome. Last but not least, we have our Innovation Award. So this was a technology that introduced a novel approach to a solution in WASH with a clear differentiation from existing solutions. The innovation was technically sound, and the claims were supported by testing and evidence. And last but not least, the user experience was incorporated into the design, which we know is very, very important. So this year, this is the first time we're doing it, we were not expecting this at all. There actually was a tie, exactly to 2 decimal points. So we cannot choose, the judges, there were the 4 judges, they cannot choose between them. So we did decide to give this award to 2 presenters this year. So the presenters this year are Akyas Environmental Consultancy with the Effluent Diversion Unit and Blue Filter. Yeah, let's give applause for Akyas. Yes, and Blue Filter, which was an innovative water purification system that leverages natural filtration techniques using a mixture of plant seeds. So congrats to Blue Filter as well. And because we were not anticipating a tie, they do have to share this plaque. So you guys, you can pass it back and forth. Thank you so much. You guys, let me hop on a photo.
Thank you again to Jamie, to Business Connect, to RTI International for making it happen. And you can tell it wasn't rehearsed. They all were surprised on stage, so we're excited about that. So thank you, everyone. And congratulations to all the winners. Okay, so as I mentioned, today is Thursday, and I'll introduce today's plenary in a second, but just a quick reminder about tomorrow. Tomorrow is a little bit of a different day. Again, we're going to be shifting our focus a little bit to the challenges in high-income countries. And you're going to hear in a couple of minutes that some of those conditions really aren't different than many of those that we see throughout the world. And so we're going to be very excited to talk about some of these issues. We'll have 2 keynote speakers. Both will be a fireside chat, and so there should be the opportunity to ask questions with Michael Regan, the administrator from EPA, and Elizabeth Beiser, who was the former secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. I happen to know Elizabeth very well. I'm very excited to have this conversation. Very excited, of course, to talk to the administrator. Hopefully you'll all stick around and enjoy the conversation tomorrow. Okay, so on to today's plenary event. I think this pretty much goes without saying to this audience. Many of you know the most profound impacts of climate change are likely to be on the hydrologic cycle. Increasing temperatures, greater hydrologic variability, more extreme hydrologic events will have a significant and potentially catastrophic impact on ecosystems, on economies, on people, on livelihoods. And WASH will either be a bulwark of resilience, or it'll be another casualty of climate change's impacts. And so today's plenary will explore these interconnections between climate change and WASH and how our communities might better respond. And to kick off today's plenary, I'd like to invite up Joe Brown. Joe is a professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering here at the University of North Carolina. Welcome, Joe.
Hey everybody, good morning. Good morning. All right, cool. It's my pleasure to introduce today's plenary on climate and WASH. So there might be some grim themes ahead, but we're glad you're here. Yesterday in the finance plenary, Jason Liu showed a lot of sobering statistics and striking graphics about water resources in the context of global climate change, and he said that the climate crisis is really a water crisis. That's absolutely true. Yesterday I was looking at some data that Jeff Albert of USAID's Real Water Program in Aquia showed me on a data set they're working with. You know, when you drill down from the global statistics, which are uniformly dire, looking at what's happening at local levels, because all water is local, you can see really dramatic changes happening all over the place. This is a graph of rainfall accumulation during the rainy season from the period of 1981 to 2010 on the left. And you can see that these are considered anomalously low rainfall accumulations for the rainy season, right? We say anomalous, but this is perhaps the new normal. And this is how it's spread across the year, across months, okay? And what we observe is really, really high differences, extreme differences between rainfall accumulation in the rainy season for different months. All of this upends planning, it upends water resource uses, it upends all of the business of climate and WASH. So it's something that we really need to learn about, and I'd like to see us spend more time focusing on how water resources really impacts our work. You know, crops fail, wells run dry. So none of this stuff is new to folks in this room, and maybe one of the silver linings of the global tragedy of global heating and WASH is really that we can no longer afford to ignore the things that are happening. And I think we've been doing a lot of ignoring things that are happening in the state of North Carolina and the U.S. generally. This is I don't know if people have seen this. Have people seen this? This is really dramatic. This is a doozy photo. So this is a picture of a satellite image of our electrical grid in normal times. And then this is what it looked like right as Helene went through. So I don't know if you can see this dark finger that goes up from Florida's panhandle up to the right of Atlanta and up through the North Carolina mountains. This is what it did to our power grid, but it absolutely wrecked the water and sanitation infrastructure for a region that has millions of people living here, right? And this is some of the places that this has affected have been the most economically disadvantaged communities in the United States. Even in places where we think, we're far away from the coast and we're maybe not susceptible to this kind of thing. So the flooding has been really intense. A friend of mine shared this picture of a little creek in the mountains. This is about a 2-meter wide creek right through here. And this is what it looked like on the day that the hurricane came through. This 2-meter creek became about 200 meters across, and it washed a ton of infrastructure down the mountain. Okay, and this happened to people who are members of my family, and a lot of people sadly did not survive this event. And a lot of the infrastructure is going to take weeks, months, years to rebuild. So that includes a lot of water systems, These are systems that are not going to have safe water coming from a tap for a very long time in many cases. And those of us at UNC have been fielding questions about emergency water treatment, about how to build basic latrines. That kind of knowledge is not necessarily known to these communities, what to do about this new reality that we're all faced with. So it's not something that we can ignore anymore. I'm not sure any infrastructure could really be designed to be resilient against this kind of thing, but it certainly speaks to the need for institutional change in terms of planning for events like this, how to come back rapidly from these terrible events. And we need to think about resilience against everything from seasonal extremes, extreme events, extreme events, reduced ability to predict things, migration. We have people showing up here in Chapel Hill who are internally displaced from Western North Carolina. Our school is full of kids who are now enrolled here that can't go back to school in Asheville. And it's happening everywhere. This is another picture from the Outer Banks. This is the Outer Banks of North Carolina, if you haven't been, is a really amazing place. Coastal erosion, frequent storms, and sea level rise have created houses to fall into the ocean, and this is a septic tank right up here on the beach. So this is something that you can see here today. And these are just the local examples du jour. All of this is happening in many other places. But fortunately, we have a panel of experts who are going to tell us what to do about it. Anyway, it's all going to be great. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but we have answers, right? We have answers, Barbara? Yeah. So we have some things that we should think about. And I know many folks in this room are already thinking about all these issues and thinking about ways of mainstreaming climate and climate concerns into WASH, but it is absolutely something that we need to be on top of as a community. So with that, I'd like to invite up the charming Barbara Evans, who needs no introduction from me. She's a professor of public health and engineering at Leeds University, and she will be a moderating influence on today's panel, I hope. Please.
Thank you so much. Great. Thanks, Joe. Those of you that know me know that I've actually never been a moderating influence on anybody or anything. So I'm going to invite my lovely panel to join us. While I'm doing that, one of my students mentioned to me yesterday that she wasn't coming into this session because she finds this room very soporific. And I realized why Joel did that thing yesterday morning, so I'm going to do the same thing. So while my lovely panel join me and shuffle around here, could I ask everybody in the room who owns or has ever defecated in a toilet to please stand up? Excellent, very good. Yeah, I'm glad you answered that question correctly. Okay, now I'd like you to sit down if you live in a house which doesn't have a flushing toilet and running water in the tap. So if you live in a house where you have to go out and collect water from a well or walk to the toilet habitually, please sit down.
Now or ever?
No, now, right now. I mean, not right now today. I mean, right now generally. Okay, fine. So you're all in kind of like high-income situations. Okay, I'd like you to sit down if you have, in the last 5 years, experienced a cut of more than like 30 seconds in your water supply. I would like you to sit down if in the last 5 years you have experienced sewage backing up in your toilet or any other failure of the functionality of your toilet. All the Brits are sitting down. We have such rubbish sewage. Okay. So I actually think this is incredible, right? Like, we are the people with the high-level services, and yet, I mean, fully 3/4 of you have already had to sit down. And most of that is to do with systems which are coming under increasing pressure from a whole range of things. I mean, not just the climate, also the fact that in the UK, for example, we built our systems 200 years ago and we forgot to do maintenance. Uh-oh. But yeah, this is pretty sobering. So well done to you people who are standing up. Those people who are standing up, that's where you go when the hurricane hits, because they're clearly the people, right? Look at them well. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. So, welcome to my amazing panel. This is such a cool panel. Some of you may notice we have inserted a Bangladeshi man onto our panel. I thought there was a real problem with this panel because, I lived and worked in South Asia for a long time, and I felt like a panel that's about climate without somebody from Bangladesh or West Bengal was kind of weird. So we invited Tanvir to join us, and we're delighted to have Tanvir with us. Okay, so we heard from Joe about what's been happening in North Carolina. I don't think anybody needed to be reminded. We have the enormous pleasure of having Sarah with us today, and before Sarah got sucked into the evil world of academia, she had another life, amazingly. Sarah was a water professional working in Kenya. I mean, one day she will be again. One day she'll be running the whole thing. It's all good. So I just wanted to ask you to also, we've been talking about what's happening in the US, but I wonder if you could bring to us, Sarah, a little bit of your insight about how climate extremes are impacting people who are living in Kenya right now, in terms of their water and sanitation services. If you could just try and bring them into the room for us.
Thank you, Barbara, for that question, and Joe for setting the stage for this topic. I would like to preface by saying over the last couple of days in this conference, I've seen that WASH, climate resilience, climate change has been a hot topic in every single side event, verbal presentations that I go to. And I would like to say that there's a lot of variation in terms of sanitation access, drinking water access across the globe. Climate change, though, is an equalizer. We are all feeling its effects. It's universal. Its impacts are complex. They're numerous. And I've done some work in the informal settlements in Kenya, in Rwanda, a couple of other sub-Saharan African countries, and the effects that we are seeing right now with the flooding in North Carolina, the flooding in Florida, are not any different from what we see in Nairobi. The difference is, though, that the infrastructure that's already on the ground, infrastructure around stormwater drainages, infrastructure around sanitation and water, solid waste disposal, those might differ. So when extreme weather events hit a community that has really minimal infrastructure, social amenities, the impacts, I believe, are more devastating. So we've seen a lot of communities that have overwhelmed pit latrines. We've seen a lot of floating septic tanks. We've seen a lot of damages to superstructures, but we've also seen people being displaced, people having completely no access whatsoever for periods, sometimes even permanently, after the occurrence of an extreme weather event. What's really important to me is what I'd like to stress that extreme events are not necessarily the ones that only have impact on these communities. Think about daily variations, just really small changes in climate change, day-to-day rainfall. Those also do impact these communities. So even today, I urge that as we talk about extreme weather events, we should consider just day-to-day small little changes in climate change, changes in rainfall variation, heat stress, all of those certainly impact communities as well. I think I'll stop
great.
there for
No,
now.
that's really good. Can I just ask you a follow-up question? Because I've realized, very bad planning, that quite a lot of us, I think, are going to end up talking about flooding and rainfall. But of course, the differential effects of climate are very different. So I just wondered if I could just ask you a little bit about, there's also changes in rainfall patterns in Kenya and increasingly prolonged dry periods, which may then be followed by extreme rainfall. But I just wondered if, do you have a sense in Kenya that people are paying more attention to the increased rainfall problem or the increased drought problem, or do you find that they're both impacting people's lives?
So I find that there's a difference in the attention that's paid to rapid onset events, things like floods, cyclones really, and also really slow setting events like droughts. Those are more difficult to notice. Mm-hmm. So people will pay attention to something that's more acute, more rapid, something that hits them on the go. And I think that resources are being channeled to more acute events, rapid events, compared to the slow setting ones, in my opinion. I would also like to stress that communities are impacted differently, as we've seen with WASH all over the world. But I certainly would also like to highlight the brand that's bared by girls, women, especially as a result, because they do fetch water, they're responsible for managing sanitation systems. So therefore they have to walk further, they have to pay more, and they also have to bear personal risk when it comes to impacts of extreme events and WASH.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's really interesting. So that's a nice segue for me to Jade. If you pass the microphone, and then there's another one over there. So Jade's been researching, and I really urge you to, I wish I had a thing to flash up with your amazing work. Jade's been looking at how climate change is impacting the health outcomes of WASH interventions. And I'd really like you to tell us just a little bit about your work, particularly not just what you've already found, but I mean, it's quite a dynamic situation. So any reflections on what you think we might increasingly start to see as a basis of what you've been doing?
Sure, and thank you for having me. So I'll first talk about an analysis we did using data from the WASH benefits trial in Bangladesh. Some of you may be familiar with, there were two randomized trials in Bangladesh and Kenya looking at a wide range of outcomes, but one of the main outcomes was child diarrhea. And in Bangladesh, we saw in the main analysis, which was published years ago, a 30% reduction from kind of a combined, low-cost household-level water, sanitation, and improved hygiene intervention. So what we did was we layered on publicly available spatial data on precipitation and temperature patterns that co-occurred during the trial period. And I just want to briefly say that any study could do this, right? So as long as you collect, GPS points of the location of your participants, I think it would be amazing if all of us in this sector start doing this kind of analysis, because it'll be really powerful. But anyway, in terms of what we found, so we looked at, okay, when there was heavy rainfall, when there were above median temperatures, whether it be maximum, mean, minimum temperature, we looked at a lot of different exposures. Did the effect of these WASH interventions vary? And it could have gone in either direction. You might think, oh, when there's heavy rainfall, these kind of low-cost household interventions might fail, right? But what we actually found was during heavy rainfall events and during the peak of the monsoon season and during higher temperatures, the interventions had stronger effects on diarrhea. So to give a few numbers, during heavy rainfall events, we see instead of this 30% decrease in diarrhea, it was a 60% decrease. And for above median temperatures, it was a 50% decrease. So this was actually really kind of made us feel optimistic, because it sort of suggests, at least in this setting, right, with all the caveats, in this setting, with these interventions, that we have a stronger effect than we actually originally thought when we account for seasonality, when we account for weather. As climate change progresses, to get to your sort of second question, you can sort of think of it, where we have the new normal, right, where we're not always talking about floods, extreme heat waves or drought, but more heavy rainfall, more high heat days. And under those conditions, our findings seem to suggest that these kinds of interventions are going to be increasingly important, and they're already working decently well. We don't have data on, or at least in that particular study, we didn't look at the extremes, and so that's an area for future research.
Yeah, so basically here we're flipping it over and saying not only is WASH affected by climate, but it's also potentially part of building out resilience to climate effects, which I think is something we don't always think of. And it's hard to think of when you're looking at those pictures of North Carolina, right? Okay, so let me just hold that for a moment, because I'm going to come back to Jade. Also, her papers are awesome. Also, when you do that amazing work, she just said, don't forget to cite her work. It's very important. That's for the students out there. So I want to just, so we've been talking about the kind of lived experience at the sort of ground level, if you like. I'm just going to take us right up to the top of the pyramid and turn to Anne. Who's at the top of the pyramid. But I just want you to ask, just to give us some context. So we've been hearing about these very immediate effects on people's lives. Could you just tell everybody, so we're all up to speed, a little bit with what's the response that you see from the international community in the kind of WASH and climate space?
Yeah, so thanks, Barbara. And so maybe just a couple of things just to say that I think now more than ever, the international community is really well placed to respond to the global WASH, climate resilient WASH crisis. And there's a couple of important things that have happened. One is the global goal on adaptation. So we've seen that, within the global goal on adaptation that was announced at the last COP, we have a dedicated target on water and sanitation. And I think this is just so huge for the sector, because it basically takes the adaptation goal, which is quite broad, and now translates it into sectors and meaningful action. And I think related to that, and just to say that, there's a piece of work that happened over 2 years, through the efforts of the sector to position good evidence and argumentation to support negotiators through a series of workshops and negotiations, and position WASH as a really important sector to track. And part of the evidence that was presented was that the sector already has good and effective mechanisms for monitoring water and sanitation, and that we're already working with key financiers like the Green Climate Fund to develop sectoral targets. I think the the controversy with adaptation was that it was, how do we track adaptation, which is so contextual across countries, and pin it to specific sectors. But I think the sector has done a really great job at lobbying over the course of the last 2 years through negotiators to present some of these key arguments. So we have that. And related to that, we also have a lot of work going on now on tracking and monitoring climate resilient wash. So we have the SWA that's looking at how do we identify and define climate resilient wash across the sector, so we're speaking with a common voice. But we also have the related monitoring group to the GGA, which is looking at how do we define global indicators to track climate resilient wash, to track progress across countries. That's 2. And then 3, on financing. We've been working for a long time now with the Green Climate Fund on sector-specific guidelines, the water security guidelines, and most recently we have the climate resilient sanitation guidelines to support country programming in this area. And then finally, I think on evidence generation, the sector has responded really well to what was for a long time gaps in climate resilient wash evidence. And we're seeing that evidence grow. We're seeing more practical implementation research happening, but a lot of research that has really helped to bring wash firmly onto the climate agenda.
That's amazing. Thank you, Anne. That's an incredibly brilliant summary of an enormously complicated world. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to Anne in a minute, but I just want to turn to Rachel, because I think one of the things that, Anne, you and I have talked about this, one of the challenges with getting that high-level buy-in is that the next question is how do we bring it down to the sort of implementation level? And we heard on Tuesday in the plenary, about this challenge of translating guidance into practical programming. And fortunately, we have Rachel with us. And I wanted to ask you a very specific question, Rachel. I know you've just started working on a new financing facility, which is aiming to support high-quality wash interventions that will contribute to this increased resilience. So I just wanted to really ask you a little bit about that. What are you doing and how's it going?
This is such a great question because I don't have to cram for the for it. So I think, let's see. So the Resilient Water Accelerator is an initiative that's being incubated by WaterAid. And WaterAid has a great history of doing this, right? Where someone comes up with a good idea and WaterAid says, there's something there. And let's try and put some resources behind it and see what we can do. And so we just received our first sort of large influx of funding in July, and we've gone from being kind of thinking about things to now doing, which is very exciting. So what does the Resilient Water Accelerator do? Our original hypothesis was, everyone says, and it's been saying for 20 years, there's just a lack of bankable projects in the sector. That's kind of a nice shorthand for things aren't getting done because there's no bankable projects. So what the Resilient Water Accelerator was set up to do was to say, well, let's take that, let's actually poke a stick at that. Why are there no bankable projects? And could we create a way to have bankable projects? But the twist there is, in order to have a bankable project, we have to think about climate resiliency. Right? And we also have to look beyond wash to thinking about water services, sanitation services, and then the bulk water supply, and then the nature-based solutions, and kind of look at industrial water use, because we are looking at the full hydrological system. What we have learned in the last year of our thinking and exploring, and we work at a global level, just kind of scanning around and looking for these things, talking with investors across the spectrum of financiers and funders, as well as we have in-country staff in Bangladesh and Nigeria, and we're looking to expand now to 2 more countries, which is very exciting. What we have found is actually that lack of the theory that, there are a bunch of projects on the ground, they're just not bankable, is false, right? So actually, it's around the origination of the project. Where does the project idea come from? And then what is that early stage due diligence and design thinking to make sure that it's not, we have a water or sanitation project, and then we'll do a checklist after it's designed and already kind of baked to see how we can call it a climate resiliency project. But actually, I was just thinking on stage, I've never had this insight before, so I don't know that this will hold with my colleagues, but it's almost like, remember when human-centered design became a thing? And it was like, we have to actually think of the customer at the beginning of the project. In a way, this is what we're doing, climate-centered design, right? How do we start thinking about the climate mitigation opportunities and the climate adaptation opportunities before there's even a project. And so that changes the way that you start thinking about the design of a project. First, you define a market. What are those market boundaries? What's the regulation for that? And that could be, for example, a service area with a utility in a municipality, but it also could be a global kind of regulation in terms of like a scope 3 emissions regulation that then dictates supply chains, right? From industry down to factories on the ground in Bangladesh, for example, right? Yeah. And so we do that, and then we're looking to say, well, what are the investable opportunities within that market boundary that could attract some private finance or actually could just break even? I mean, we can also be realistic. We're not talking about privatizing water. We're just trying to figure out how can we make this financially resilient, not just climate resilient. So anyway, so that's kind of a bit of a big overview. It's a very exciting time for us, and I'm just thrilled to be able to share what we're doing with you and hopefully learn from you as well and others in the audience as we proceed.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to let Tanvir come in here, because otherwise, you know, you always have that thing where there's a panel member that gets left hanging at the end. I want to come back to some of the others. So Tanvir has recently joined the technical advisory group for an effort that's being led by the GLAS and the JMP to develop some indicators for climate resilient WASH, which fits right in with what Anne and Rachel have just been talking about. And you've joined the technical advisory group. So I just wanted to ask you, Tanvir, what's your motivation? Why do you think now is the time to get involved in this climate issue? Why are you here? I mean, apart from the fact that you're great.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. Now, we all know very well that climate change has always challenged WASH infrastructure and consequently WASH services. And there are different types of WASH infrastructure, some very robust, some not very robust. And there's an issue of capacity as well. We see that in some contexts, some infrastructure perform well, but that same infrastructure in some other context, it doesn't perform very well, and notably due to climate change effects. Now, these nuances has to be captured in some way, especially in the context of climate change. And there is also the capacity of the government as well. The policy and institutional arrangements, they also need to be looked into. And that's why I think that these indicators could serve as a useful tool, because it's not only the attributes of the particular WASH infrastructure that's important, how is it functioning, and you also need to capture the user experience and how the national or subnational governments or the specific vendors and other stakeholders are actually adapting to this situation. And we are all familiar with the JMP and the GLAS indicators. The JMP indicators provide us a good example of how the progress in water supply and sanitation happening globally. The GLAS indicators side by side talk about policy, institutional issues, monitoring, human resource and finance and other things. So we can also ask the same questions in terms of climate resilient infrastructures, climate resilient WASH. For example, how is the progress of climate resilient WASH infrastructures happening over the years? Even in the same inspiration of the GLAS framework, we can also ask the question, like, what is the percentage of countries having policy, institutional frameworks, capacity, and human resources and finances to tackle with this? So this information will all be very much useful, especially for the countries which are most affected by climate change, like Bangladesh. The video that you saw over there, that's a very frequent occurrence in Bangladesh, and we are all suffering. And so it's not only useful for the global, as a global indicators, as Anne mentioned about the global goal of adaptation. We need to track those, but also these will be vitally important within the context of each nation which are affected by climate change. Yeah. So the government needs to understand that which technology to use, which infrastructure to use, which capacity to develop, and where do you need to do more work in institutional arrangement and divert the funding. So I think these indicators with a climate resilient touch would be very useful and may guide the governments who are more affected by climate change. And that's one of the motivations for me to work in this group. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Tanvir. Thanks. In a moment, I'm going to open the floor to questions. There's a couple of rules. The rules is I'm opening the floor to questions. I'm really sorry. We would have had you all on the panel, but there's not room on the stage. So if you could try and avoid being a panelist and be a questioner to ask these lovely people some questions, that would be great. Questions usually are one sentence, and to quote the very wonderful Tagvi Nagpal, they start with who, what, why, or how. Also, if I could just very kindly ask you, if you have already been able to ask a question in plenary, could I please ask you to hang back, because I know there's a lot of people that would like to get involved, and likewise, well, online we can't monitor so well. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but if you feel like getting up, do so, because I'll take 2 or 3 from the floor once we've gone down this round. If I could ask you for some very short answers, I'm sorry, because I'm going to ask you some terribly difficult questions, but just some little nuggets. I'm going to turn to Jade. No, I'm going to turn to Anne, first of all. I just have a little bit of a question about coordination in the sector, because there's a lot going on. So could you just tell us, I mean, I think UNICEF's really trying to sort of play a role there. Can you just reassure everybody that you know, kind of we're going to be able to somehow coordinate together on this very challenging topic?
Yeah, so, well, okay, maybe just at a UNICEF level, just to say that, you know, UNICEF does have what we call the Sustainability and Climate Change Action Plan, and it puts climate at the center, recognizing the impacts on children from extreme weather and deteriorating environments. But within that, it is interesting because WASH has been placed as sort of an accelerator sector and exemplary in terms of having articulated and being able to measure what we do. So I think that's kind of interesting at an organizational level. But then across organizations, you know, coming down to my mandate for sanitation, a couple of years ago, we realized, you know, UNICEF, the World Bank, BMGF, a couple of other organizations, that we didn't have a good story to tell our countries about what was climate resilient sanitation. And so we were really comparing notes and decided to sort of join forces to try and articulate sanitation in the climate space, but then also to articulate climate within the sanitation space. So this group came together, came to be known as the Climate Resilient Sanitation Coalition. We launched a call to action at COP27. And then last year we started the idea of a annex, some special guidance for GCF that would be an annex to their water security guidelines, specifically on how do you do climate resilient sanitation. So I'm really happy to say that now the group is over 30 members strong, and we include groups from, you know, the finance institutions, academia, NGOs, the UN, the private sector, and, you know, really filled a gap in terms of advocacy and knowledge of this area. And we recently, I think it was last week, we put on the GCF put on their website this document that was the product of all these organizations coming together and writing this guidance on climate resilient sanitation. So I really suggest you have a look at that. But the group's focus is really threefold. One is around financing and looking at, you know, how we connect finance to better sanitation programming. It's around advocacy. How do we come together as a sector and really create a strong voice for sanitation in the climate discussion? And then the final pillar of what we do is around evidence generation. So looking at, you know, what are the emerging evidence gaps? How do we fill them? How do we work jointly between practitioners and academia to fill some of the areas that we need to think about and fill all these emerging knowledge gaps.
Great. So I'm going to turn to Jade. So I'm really going to ask you to be quick, because these people are very scary. I mean, Anne's just talking about two things. One is guidance and also evidence gaps. So just, Jade, I know I'm putting you hugely on the spot, but just based on what you've been doing, a lot of people would say that climate resilient wash or even resilient wash is just good wash. But I mean, the thing is, it's clearly true that we can do other things, we can do better. So just based on your experience, do you have one little nugget for the group on what specifically you think we should do differently that could increase resilience, just from what you've learned from doing your research? I'm really sorry to ask you that question.
Very tough to answer very, very quickly. I think I like to think about this in two ways. We have the new normal, right? And then we have the extremes that are getting more extreme. And so I think a lot of the tools we have, we just need to get them out there, roll them out, freshen them up a little bit. But then there probably is a lot of room for technological innovation around the most extreme situations in all settings, high income all the way to low income. So it would be my very brief response
Amazing.
to that.
That's a real nugget. I'm going to ask Rachel a similarly nightmarishly very short question. So, what looks like a good project for you? I mean, what is the one thing that's different that, looks like a really good project in this new normal world for you?
I mean, so our, if you will, screening criteria or our ambitions, right, are that a project demonstrates some form of climate resilience, ideally aligned with an existing framework that others are also monitoring, that there is financial viability, which means that there's a revenue model, right? And that there is that the costs are met, maybe with a little bit of extra return on investment, that there's an actual known delivery model for long-term operations of whatever assets those are, whether those are nature-based or gray, and that there is a regulatory driver for the project, and that there's an opportunity for that idea and that model to be replicated. So those are our 5 core features, the things that we are looking for. Most of the time what we have found is that projects that we see and that we find are either, they have some twinkling of financial viability and absolutely no mention of climate, or they are totally really cool on the climate side and 100% grant-based and one-off. And so that is where we are very much actively looking to create this vehicle, like this sort of the flywheel for investments to be able to be possible. And wherever possible, can I just make a plug? Like, I am so excited about what you just said about the call to action, because we don't want to recreate the wheel on monitoring frameworks, and all of this sometimes it can feel quite slow in the sector around what is happening around things like indicators and monitoring frameworks. But when you look back on where we've come from and where we are, it's a really exciting time to hear about how these things are being bridged. And we might not be there yet, but it's a really exciting thing to be seeing in this conference.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jade, you win the prize for brevity, I have to say, but it's all good. But I really like the idea that there's this tension. There's, first of all, we're trying to improve just the quality of project delivery, which we've heard a lot about this week. Then we're trying to adjust to the new normal. We've got to worry about whether we have the capacity to just do that. And then we have to ask these other very existential questions about how do we cope with, there's no sanitation system in the world, as Joe said, which withstands 6 feet of water running through your house. So then we need to think about emergency response and recovery, which we perhaps never had to think about before in some of these settings. That's a huge number of challenges, an amazingly rich conversation. I'd like to open the floor. I'm going to take these 4 lovely people here. For some reason, this is quite as I look at it, this is quite a left-wing audience, fortunately. But if you're looking at it, just look at it through my eyes. It's a whole lot better. You can tell us who you are. A question, please, starting with an interrogative word, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Maureen Fuller, Operation Blessing. How can we ensure climate resiliency strategies do not undermine or inhibit efforts to improve the current well-being of those that still lack access to basic wash services?
Wonderful question. Thank you so much. I'll take all of them together and then I'll come together. Yep.
Hi, Krista Cook, Global Support and Development. We're a disaster response organization. Rachel, I really liked what you said about building climate change in from the beginning, and I'm curious how we could do that in the disaster space, and if that overlaps at all with how Jade mentioned that point of use filters can have a bigger impact post-crisis. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This is very scary. Yeah.
Get ready. Hi, I'm Jeff Albert. I'm with Aquia and the Real Water Project. Question for Jade. If you could talk about, you had said that we all could be exploiting data, these global data sets. If you could speak to how you chose the GLOW H2O and the FuseNet LDES products to do your analysis. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And
thanks, all very interesting, and it was indicated earlier that designing infrastructure to be completely resilient to extreme weather events is difficult, if not altogether impossible in some circumstances. So when it comes to planning for extreme weather events and particularly designing forecasting systems, it's necessary to either over-predict the worst case or under-predict to avoid sort of null predictions. So when it comes to best reaching decision makers, if someone is designing one of these systems, do you over-predict the worst case or under-predict to avoid sort of false confidence in your system, because it's by its very nature uncertain? So thanks.
excellent, and I happen to know, because I have secret inside information, that's Vince Moran, because he forgot to tell us. Great, those are amazing questions. There will be time for some more, because you did a wonderful job of asking questions like I asked. Well done.
Barbara, can I add one from online?
Oh,
It's
one
actually
from online,
it's
yes,
very,
please.
It's very similar to one of the ones that you were
Yeah.
asked before, which is that it's often the humanitarian folks that are dragged in to respond to these types of problems originally. And it's that difficult transition from humanitarian response to long-term sustainable service provision. Does that provide an opportunity for the humanitarian assistant folks to work a little bit differently in terms of coordination and collaboration with those communities around climate resilience?
Fantastic, thank you. No, those are really great. So let's just dive straight into the nerdy question first, shall we? Because, I love a nerdy question, which is on this data set question and the use of data. Sorry, I'm a professor, I'm allowed to do that.
Happy to be the panel nerd.
Yeah.
Great question, and I just really would love for more folks to do this kind of thing, so happy to chat about it if anyone's interested after. When it comes to working with these publicly available spatial data sets, there's always sort of this trade-off between having really good resolution in space, right, where you have like really small pixels that are covering small geographic areas that say there was this much rain in this tiny, tiny little area, right, versus really good temporal resolution, where you're looking at patterns by the minute or by the day as opposed to by the month. And so the choice of the product that you're going to use is going to come down to your particular study, the data structure that you have, what question you're looking at. For rainfall, like we often want to know things like, well, what was the total rainfall within certain periods of time? Depending on the disease outcome or other outcome you're looking at, there might be important lag periods where you actually, and our analysis was lagged. So you say, I actually think if there's this heavy rainfall event, the effect would take place at the earliest a week later in terms of translating to a measurable health impact. And so that kind of thinking through the lag period, thinking through the kind of chain of cause and effect is going to really drive which data set is going to be appropriate. But the good news is there are many, many options, and so usually you're able to find something that's totally free, publicly available, that you can merge onto an existing study.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to make a plug really that a lot of this amazing climate data is available, open access. The climate community are incredibly good at this. The World Bank has an incredible public access data set on climate data. The UK Met Office has a ton of data online. There's really great resources, and I think we all have to definitely become more literate about that. I'm just going to actually turn to Anne a moment for this sort of like cluster of questions about where humanitarian response fits within this conversation. I mean, first of all, there's an organizational question about, other humanitarian folks in this amazing conversation that you've told us about. But also, I mean, you've worked on both sides of that equation. So just any quick reflections on how that connection could be made stronger?
Yeah, I think it is kind of a natural fit with a lot of the humanitarian work, because I think, in the humanitarian context, we are already thinking about risk assessments as part of programming, and there is this thinking about humanitarian development context. So I think, when we think about climate resilient WASH, a lot of it is around the risk assessment part of it. So I think there is a very natural fit within the humanitarian context, which is already looking at hazards to begin with, but now it's really an opportunity for us to mainstream this as part of regular development programming. So I think, yes, I think there is a real strong link with what we're doing in the humanitarian context, and I think in many ways it reinforces the whole need for a stronger humanitarian development type approach.
Can I ask you just a slight follow-up question? Because one of the things that occurs to me as well, I mean, we were talking about the new normal and then these extreme events, but it also strikes me that the extreme events have a geographical effect as well. I mean, Joe mentioned, populations moving. And I'm thinking that some of the kind of innovation may be about working out how better to temporarily provide people with high quality service, but not necessarily in the place where they're going to end up. Like, you don't want to necessarily lock people into the place they've had to move to. I mean, in your experience, is that, have we done enough to think about which interventions are temporary but good quality compared to which interventions are permanent and need to be really good quality? Is that something?
No,
that's on the
I mean, I
table?
think it's a really great question, and I think under the remit of urban sanitation, I think it's where we started thinking about it the most, because when we had urban disasters, there was a drive to move people but not move them for long periods, and the issue of fecal sludge management came into play in terms of, what types of technologies could we employ that could be semi-permanent. So I think there's been a lot of research in this area, in the emergency sphere in particular. I know when I was working in Indonesia, we set up an entire innovation hub dedicated to looking at fecal sludge management in emergency contexts. But the reality was that a lot of what we were doing in emergency contexts also related to what we were doing in a development context. So there was this sort of, spectrum of technologies that could kind of be used in different contexts. But I think with climate change, that need to have flexible approaches that are semi-permanent to permanent is becoming even more important.
Excellent. I'm going to come to the equity question last, and I've got a couple of questions for some of you, but I want to go to Vince's question. I'm going to put Tanvir on the spot, because it's a really interesting question, isn't it? If we stick with the traditional way we've built risk into our calculations, we use return periods. And I mentioned in a session this morning that in the 80s, when I was first working at STAR, am I really boring everybody? They muted me. I was working on a response to a 1 in 200 year flood event that was right across the whole of northern Sudan in 1980, but the current flooding in the Sahel is twice as bad. So I keep asking myself, what is this, just coincidentally the other 1 in 200 year event, or is this now a 1 in 1,000 year event, or is it the new normal? And if we keep building in more and more and more, potential design, the costs are going to go out of the window, right? So I don't know, Tanvir, if you think about this in terms of how you're training your students, like, how are we going to deal with this? We can't just make things bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So where do you see that response going?
It's a tough question, though, but let me try my best. So the traditional way of designing infrastructure, especially in Bangladesh, if you talk about, it's, as you mentioned, you take a 50 or 100-year flood level and you say, add 1 meter and say that's, it's for road design or even wash infrastructure design. That's what is applied. Now, in infrastructure design, that's kind of deviating from that seems, impractical right now, because you have to allow some sort of simplicity in designing the wash infrastructure. But what I like to focus here is that, is there any way we can think about going away from keeping the wash infrastructure design as it is and try to focus more on how to keep the wash services going when the disaster is happening? Mm-hmm. Because your things might get flooded, you have to accept to that, but still you have to provide access to some sort of wash service. And we've seen in many instances in Bangladesh that maybe you've designed your infrastructure quite high, and the flood has happened. You see that infrastructure still is, but it's not accessible. Mm. So the old person cannot go. So you can see the toilet as an island over there, but there is no accessibility. Yes. Now, what does that person do? He or she goes back to open defecation. Mm. And when you go back to open defecation, now you see the whole new set of problems of behavior and other things, which you need to solve again. So we have to focus more on, during the infrastructure design, we have to focus more on how we can keep the wash services going and devise methods of alternate ways we can provide accessibility. We can, especially in fecal sludge management, devise innovative ways of having fecal sludge management, innovative technologies, makeshift technologies where we can kind of pass this period, and then we can do the restructuring. So, and when we teach our students, we also try to, we try to include more courses on this, climate resilient technologies, but I think we need to do more there.
I mean, I think what's interesting about what you're saying, it really picks up what Jade's saying, is I think the idea of getting away from a single solution that's going to operate in the same way all the time, and more towards a sort of core set of services which are there for normal, and then resilience in the system, alternative supplies, coping mechanisms that help us to sort of bridge over some of these extreme events. But that's a very different way of working. You know, it requires a much more nimble, creative problem-solving mindset, I think, which is perhaps something that, well, fortunately these guys are all going to be thinking that way for sure. I'm going to give Rachel the crackerjack question, which is the question about the trade-off between resilience, which might have costs, and access, universal access or equity. So, you know, are we at risk of losing any of the sort of progress we've made in trying to make sure we're not leaving people behind by pushing for these more ambitious projects, you know, because so much money needs to go into making them resilient that people won't be served? I'm sure you have a view. I mean, how do you see that as a trade-off or not?
That is such a great question. And I don't know if this is a punt, but going back to the plenary yesterday, there's something of get your house in order, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's something of before it's so sorry, for many of you might not have been here yesterday. So
just make it short though.
Yes,
a lot of
the
them
climate resiliency story is like, ooh, there's climate finance. Maybe we could do this. It's shiny. The reality is very little climate finance or climate designated finance goes to water. So, and actually there's a lot of reasons why that might be that have nothing to do with us. It's purely because direct carbon capture is super interesting for tech investors. But there's something about, could we just do better with the resources that we have to provide better services? Because then that's going to give service providers, whoever they are, public or private, better bandwidth to be able to extend access to more people because they're better at doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that in itself will make the service provider more resilient, and then be able to have extra headroom to do things like disaster preparedness. You know, so it's. I know that might be a bit of a punt because I don't think that it is a trade-off if you consider how do we improve the operating efficiency of the service providers today.
Yeah, great. That's a fantastic. Yes, super.
Can I get an A on my
A plus.
B plus?
I have one more question from the floor. Please go ahead. Remember, one question and an interrogative word, please.
Okay, thank you. This is Tazin from Practical Action Bangladesh. I have actually raised this in another side event as well. Like due to climate-induced disaster, there will be a lot of migration of in-country migration will happen in future. So this migration will impact that there will be a lot of urban slums in the big cities. So in the informal setting, what will be our strategy to think about that sanitation system for the informal slum dwellers?
Great question. I'm just going to take Chair's prerogative and say we could have a whole conference on that, right? Was that the tagline yesterday? It's a really great question. I think maybe if I could just ask, who am I going to ask? I'm going to ask Sarah. But just, I mean, obviously we can't answer the whole question, but you know, if there's one thing that you want people to think about in terms of informal settlements, what would it be?
I think there's a couple of tensions that exist when you think about building resilience for informal settlements. And examples of those could be, I've seen interventions that are put in place around just elevating latrines, for example, which on the other hand would limit people with limited mobility, accessibility issues. I've seen interventions that require communities in informal settlements to move to higher grounds when in true sense they really cannot afford to leave their homes. I've seen interventions that do not factor in issues of land tenure security as well. So thinking about balancing these tensions, and climate resilience really does not exist in isolation. There's all of these constellation of factors, land security, tenure, and transportation, supply chains, all of those I'd say should be factored into climate resilience.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, one of the things I always feel is that we're trying to it's almost like we're looking at the problem through the wrong end of the telescope. You know, the existence of informal slums is itself a driver of insecurity and a lack of resilience. So we kind of need to work more holistically probably in that space. So it's a great question and a super important topic. I'm mindful of the time, and you know what always happens at the end? You say, oh, just 1 minute for each speaker, and it's a nightmare. But these speakers are under tight control, so I feel like we'll just be about to manage it. You literally all have a minute, I think. And I think what I want to say is this room is full of amazing young people. My career, you know, we've been working, whatever, you know, from when I started to now, has been unbelievably transformative. It's easy to feel like we didn't make a lot of progress, but we made a huge amount of progress. But I think for young people starting out in their careers now, you know, in 40 years' time, the world's going to look different, and they're still going to be trying to solve these problems because the goalposts will keep moving because things are getting harder. So I just wanted to ask all you very wise people for a piece of advice or a motto or a thing to take with them into their future careers for all of the early career researchers and young people in the audience. And I'm going to start with the oldest person on the panel. Tanvir, sorry.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, for the future generation or who are working with climate change, I'll speak on the from the point of view of an engineer. I think future researchers, or particularly engineers who I teach day to day, they cannot afford to just take a siloed approach. I mean, they have to think in a multidisciplinary way. It's not only the technical solution, but also the critical thinking ability. It will guide you through to some of these challenges. And I think engineering students should have a basic knowledge of core climate science, a little bit on how the predictions and things. I see a lot of AI and machine learning tools being used for climate predictions, and that has kind of is helping us, I see. Engineers should also focus on recycling, renewable energy, and those sustainable construction, and those types of sort of things. Although we are engineers, we also need to understand like carbon storage, climate resilient infrastructure, and associated carbon credits. Those needs to be learned as well. We should also have some basic knowledge on policy regulation, and also very importantly, communication and stakeholder engagement, how we transmit this knowledge to our stakeholders. Adaptive planning is typically the key to in a deltaic region, and we need to understand what that actually means. And these things should be built into the curriculum. But the way the things are, as you mentioned, the goalpost is changing. That means new knowledge is already is coming very rapidly. Sometimes our curriculum cannot take that into consideration. So try to keep an open eye and get as much as professional training as possible to supplement your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and I really want to just hark back to the plenary that we had about guidance, and that's exactly it, is trying not to just think that we have one handbook and that's the answer, because mostly the handbook will say, be adaptive, be responsive, so it's having that ability. These people sound amazing. I mean, do you know any people that can do all of that? Because I would really like to hire them. Anne, your words of wisdom.
Yeah, I think the advice I would give is that, you know, the climate crisis has not, it's not just about the fact that it's changed the goalposts. I think it's also a really big opportunity for the WASH sector. So I think it's actually a really exciting time to be in the sector. I think we're placed in kind of a leadership position to kind of showcase how to do this and how to respond and how to track progress. So I think there is an opportunity there. But I think in terms of, you know, the kind of research and action we need now, I think the focus really needs to be, like, I think the guidance on the, you know, what should happen is happening a lot faster than the how. So kind of referring back to the plenary we had earlier in the week, like, we know where we have to be going, right? But we don't have enough research on how to get there. And so I think, you know, if there's one thing I would suggest for researchers, it's really, you know, also focus on the implementation side of things. How do we support countries? How do we make this research actionable for countries? Because I think there is also an urgency to having this information sooner rather than later.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Rachel.
I'm going to take a different tack, which maybe just to round it out. I think that in this water space, when we're talking about very technocratic things and financial things and whatnot, we often can lose sight of the spiritual and cultural aspects of water that I think draw and drew many of us to this space, right? If water is in us, we are mostly made of water. And I would encourage you throughout your careers to stay connected to water, right? Like not as like, because go learn how to surf, go kayaking, swim, right? Connect with water. And I think that will help. It helps ground us, and it also gives us an appreciation for and a perspective on all of the various other very important professional, technical, right, like work that we do.
Yeah, that is great advice. However, I sit on the National Engineering Policy Council in the UK, and one of my jobs is to advise the government whether or not it's safe to swim in our waterways because of our failing sewerage. Don't necessarily swim.
Kayak instead.
Kayaking, and don't drink a pint of it, whatever you do. That's all I'm saying, okay? But that's great advice. Thank you so much. Jade.
So I'll direct my comment to my fellow research nerds in training. I think, no matter what you end up researching or studying, climate change is going to affect it. It sounds very rote and obvious, but I have, an ongoing field study that's not about climate resilience or climate change, and we have had to really shift how we're answering our question and what methods we're using because we're losing households to river erosion. So I encourage you to think about this from the very beginning of every study, no matter what topic you're working on, and then to just, again, plug, what I was talking about before. The advances in data availability and AI tools to actually make that data easier to use and of better quality for prediction, it's only going to get better and better. We need to make sure that the benefits of all that new technology trickle down to the populations that really need the biggest impacts. And so I just encourage you to get those skills, learn the skills so that you can make sure that we can help generate evidence to improve health.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to flip the question slightly for Sarah, because you are the future. So, you're very welcome to advise your fellow young people, but also, do you have any stern words for us old people?
That's a difficult one. I'm going to start with young professionals, but I suppose this advice will apply either way. So, two things. I'm going to make a case for thinking about a framing around environmental justice when you think about issues of climate resilience and WASH. So inequities of water access and sanitation access are deeply linked with climate resilience. So just thinking about, are we making it more difficult for communities that already do not have good access to clean water and safely managed sanitation? The other piece is around, for folks who are a lot of community-facing work, I will encourage you to have an appreciation for sort of local capacities and indigenous knowledge. There's a whole lot of assets in the communities that we work with. So thinking about some of the strategies that they have in place to mitigate climate change impacts, adapting all of those, including them in the design process, I think is a good way to go. I think communities are the experts of their own lives. There's a whole lot of contextual intelligence that comes from a lived experience. So just adopting indigenous knowledge, local capacities, I think would be great. That's my advice.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much. This is amazing to me, but one of the things that strikes me is, these are really big existential challenges, and it's really easy to become overwhelmed. This is a lot to take up, even that advice is quite terrifying in many ways, but I also think it's important to remember that it's always been like that. One of the things that I like to say, I like to remind people, is that everything we do, if we give people water and sanitation, we are committing a deeply political act. Many of you will have heard me say that many times before. It's one of the most empowering things that people can do, is not be tied to the drudgery of walking for 30 minutes to get a bucket of water and living surrounded in excreta. And if we can do that in a way where the most vulnerable communities are somehow cushioned from some of these effects, it's really worth it. It's worth learning those skills. It's worth negotiating. It's worth doing all this hard graft, because the impact of it is not just 30% of people now have access to water. It's 30% of people can now engage in the political life of society, and that's incredibly empowering. So I just want to really thank you for these unbelievable words of wisdom. I want to really encourage everybody to reach out to these incredible guys. They're here for the rest of the day, I think, unless you're really fed up and you want to leave. No, they're all staying. I'd like to thank the organisers for giving us the opportunity to talk about this topic, which I think is hugely important, and hand back to Erin. And I literally beat my target by 3 minutes.
Huge thank you to Barbara, Sarah, let's see, who else do we have up there? Rachel and Tanvir. Really appreciate all the support that